Okay, well, it's good to be back. Nice and early, fresh. If you got your cell phone, please put them off unless you're expecting a very important call from the president or someone. Other than that, we don't want to be disturbed. And so, I'm so glad it's actually quite cold because you won't fall asleep. The cold will keep you wide awake, eh? Okay, so we're talking about making family a priority in a turbulent world, and this is session 2. And today we're going to talk about the threats that families face. And there's a number of threats that we face as families. And so we're going to talk about a few of those. There are going to be some that I won't cover, so don't worry too much about that. And as Gary said in the introduction, if you want to ask me a question, please put up your hand if you need clarification or you want to ask a question about something. Please feel free to do that. I don't mind being interrupted and stuff as long as you don't disagree with what I'm saying. Who's looking after our children? Yes, they are. Okay. They are, eh? Yeah. I actually wanted to say, there's two things that make it easy for a speaker. The one thing is the worship. The worship, when there's good worship, it makes it, hey Gary, and any of you who've spoken in a church setting, if the worship is not good or mediocre, or there's no it's like a grind, it makes it hard for us as speakers to get up. So with worship like this, it makes it so easy. So thanks so much for just preparing the way. That's the one thing. The other thing is the vibe that the people put out. You guys. When you come, I've been to churches where the vibe is nowhere. It's gone to the other church. And that makes it very hard. So I just said to Liz when we were in the kitchen there eating, what a good vibe there is. And it makes it so much easier for a speaker when there's a good vibe amongst the people, laughing, joking, especially when there's a lot of laughing. It's great. So well done, that's good. Okay, so who other than Sue is looking after our children? According to some recent surveys, 47% of children report dim expectations of life, stating that they anticipate being unhappy. This was taken when I was at Youth for Christ a couple of years ago. They did a survey in a whole, I think there was, I can't remember, about 600 schools that were involved in the Eastern Cape. And they went around and they did a whole lot of surveys. And this is just a bit, they gave us this huge manual to actually go through. And these are just some of the things that I took. So some of these statistics, even though they are up there, you may find that they're out of date because it's probably even worse. Because this was taken a couple of years ago. And also just to say something about statistics. Some people say, well, statistics, what does that help us? I mean, you can make any sucker statistic out your thumb if you like. But why I like to put statistics up, because it helps us to become aware that even though it says 40%, it doesn't matter about the 40%. I just want you to be aware that there's a problem. That if we've got to put a percentage to the fact that there are children who are expecting a dim view of life, we've got a problem. Even if it was 1%. So statistics are there to help us just think about what we need to do to make a difference. Boys, when compared to girls, are 6 times more likely to have learning disabilities, 3 times more likely to be registered drug addicts, and 4 times more likely to be diagnosed as emotionally disturbed. 77% of delinquency-related court cases involve males. 45% of youth become sexually active between ages 16 to 18 years. And if you've got time at the end, I'll show you some of the graphs that come up. So look at that. That's younger, because they've just passed a law that it's okay for a child at the 13 years of age to have consensual sex with someone. But yet, you can get arrested if you are caught kissing your partner in public if you're under 16. Now, how does that make sense? You can be 12 years old and have an abortion without your parents knowing it. That's scary. What does that do to society? Breaking the whole fabric down. Because we say that we want to protect our children. But when you're saying things like and passing laws like that, that's not protecting children. 40% of learners in grade 8 and 12 smoke. Depends what school you go to. I remember working in one of the schools in East London when I was with Youth for Christ. Kieran, can you put these two lights off here? Because it make it a bit darker that side. I was working in a school in East London, and it was a bunch of boys, and one of our workers was working there, and she wasn't handling it, so they asked me to go because the boys were just making a mockery of it. So I went in there, I thought, okay, I'm going to sort these guys out. So there they are, they're all sitting there, and I'm just about to start talking. Okay, guys, sit down. Okay, sit down. In walks this guy. He's dragging his bag along the floor. He's got his jacket over, and you know how the coloured oaks walk, like this. So he's walking in like this, and he walks right past me. I say, hey, bro, what's going on? It's 10 minutes into the lesson. He looks at me and says, nah, sir, I was just finishing my smoke. And the oak was serious. Just like, what? Okay, go and sit down. 40%, yeah. So 45% of the children are drunk at least once a month. 33 have smoked dacha, marijuana, 33%. Okay, these are, I think they were taken in about 2008, 9, somewhere around there. Okay, so you can see that there's probably a little bit more. 27% of children have tried Mandrax, ecstasy, or LSD. And guess where they get it? At their school. At their school. And the kids know. My wife said that when she was at school, she was offered drugs. That was many years ago. And she went to one of the more prestigious schools in East London. And she was offered drugs at that stage. A friend of mine went overseas, and they were walking. He took a group of boys for a hockey festival or something, and he was walking through the streets there in Brazil or some place like that. And a guy came up to him and said, hey, do you want some Coke? So my friend said to him, no, I only drink Pepsi. So one of the students went to him, sir, I don't think it was Coke he was offering. I think it's Coke, you know. That was Shane Verveers, Gary, you know. 22% have used crack, coke, or Mandrax. Suicide in this age group has risen from 0.8% in 1990 to 4.2% in 2002. Today, over 11 million children under the age of 15 living in sub-Saharan Africa have been robbed of one or both parents by HIV. 7 years from now, the number is expected to have grown to 20 million. In 1990, 4% of children between 12 and 18 years were involved with Satanism. In 2002, this has risen to 17.5%. We don't realize that Satanism is rife. Witchcraft is rife. Occultism is rife amongst our young people. The games that they play. You just have to go into do yourself a favor and go into one of the game shops where they sell those video games that your children play on PlayStation and Wii and Xbox and stuff. And just go and see how many of those games have got 2 to 80 or an 18 age restriction on. And you'll see how many children are actually playing them. And they're way, way, way under the age of 18. And the violence and graphic violence and swearing and use of drugs and prostitution that's in the game that they play, that they actually become the gangster themselves. I was dealing with a group of grade 6s a couple of years ago, and I was talking to them about the statistics that say that only 30% of people that matriculate get jobs in South Africa. So the one boy put up his hand and said, so what, why must I study hard? I said, well, you don't have to be one of the 30%. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I'll become a gangster. He's 12 years old. So I laughed. So he said, no. And the other guys around him said, no, sir, it's true. I said, but why you want to become? He said, because they got cars, they got money, they got girls. And you see, we don't realize, as white South Africans, that there is a group of people. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you do because you work with those children, but there's a group of people out there that we are so out of touch with because that's how they live. But they're becoming so much part of our lives because they're in our schools, they're with our children, and I work with them on a regular basis. And that's how they live. Those poor kids go home hungry every day. The first meal that the guy has is breakfast that morning. He doesn't have another meal. Some of the kids I work with have the first food they get is a sandwich that we give them at school. And there's a whole hundreds of children, thousands of kids like that in our country. Every 24 minutes, a child in South Africa has been sexually assaulted. In 2002, the number of children neglected increased by 121%. The number of abandoned children increased by 121%. By the time the average child graduates, he or she will have spent 15,000 hours in school. What values and worldview will he or she have learned during that time? If you look at the textbooks of what our kids are being taught about evolution and all that kind of stuff, that's the worldview that they're starting to get. Percentage of children coming to know Jesus. That's the age group, 4 to 14 years. That's the most time where the children come to know Jesus. But you look at the statistics, a lot of the statistics happen around that age group. You watch the pornography statistics. It's that age group there. Mark 9, verse 33-7. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12. And he said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." And we've got a job to make sure that we are looking after our own children first and the other children second. Children that have been abandoned, that 121% statistic. It becomes our job as a church to make sure that we are looking after those children because no one else is going to. Do you think the state cares about those kids? They don't care. They don't care. The church, we as parents, must care about our kids first and foremost because no one else is going to take care of it. You ask that question in the front, who's taking care of our kids? We cannot allow anybody else to take care of our kids. It's our responsibility first. God gave those children to us to look after and take care of. You can't abandon them to the school system, to the government, and you cannot even abandon them to the church. It's not the church's role to teach your children about God. It's the father and mother's role. The Bible talks quite clearly about that. You read the whole book of Deuteronomy. In Proverbs, it talks about that. It's the father and mother, it's the parent's role, the house, the home, the family. That's where children are supposed to learn about Jesus. My first priority to evangelize is to get my children saved, not anybody else. It's my role to make sure, because I cannot go out there and win the whole world and my children go to hell because I've never shared the gospel with them because I think that they know it because I'm there all the time and we talk about Jesus and stuff. I've got to make it my number one priority that my children get saved and that they stay on that path because I pray for them on a regular basis and we spend time together and we spend time reading the Bible together and we spend time talking about Jesus. Wi-Fi went down for 5 minutes, so I had to talk to my family. They seem like nice people. I saw a sign outside a restaurant that said, "No, we don't have Wi-Fi, talk to each other." The death of innocence. The evolution of a dysfunctional family, the transitional generation. They're growing up at risk to sex, substance abuse, sexual abuse, homosexuality, suicide, HIV and AIDS, Satanism, witchcraft, pornography, eating disorders, self-injury. Someone was telling me the other day that his stepdaughter came home from the dad's place and stuff like that, and she's like 10 years old, and she starts talking about herself being fat and ugly because the stepmom's telling her that. Now she's got this 10-year-old who's got an eating disorder. At 10, you think, well, what? How do people's minds work? And unfortunately, there's this attitude that people have, and I don't know quite where it's come from, but society has kind of influenced us to believe that if we say something negative to our our child or to people, that's how we'll motivate them. So if you don't study hard, you're going to fail and become a bum. So you better, put your nose and get, Or if you don't study and if you fail, you're going to go to boarding school. That's what my mom told me. If you fail, you're going to go to boarding school. So what happened? I failed. I failed twice. But then when I went to my mom, I'm crying, I failed. She said, no, I was only joking. But that's how we do it. And you find a lot of parents, they will run their kids down. Don't be so stupid. If you don't work hard, if you don't play cricket properly, you're going to be useless. They'll kick you out the team. Even coaches talk to the kids like that. And they think that negative verbal abuse is actually motivational. And it's not. Who in their right mind can believe that if you run a person down and break their spirits down and criticize them and call them names, ugly names, is actually going to make them feel better about themselves? Where does the logic come from? But yet we choose to do that, and it becomes part of how we speak to people. So pornography. I go onto YouTube just to watch a music video, and 5 hours later, there I'm watching a tutorial on how to talk to a giraffe. Have you ever done? And that's what the power of the internet is. Have you ever found that? When you're surfing the internet and you're looking at this and you're looking at that, 2 hours later, your wife's like, oh, when are you coming for supper? Quiet, I'm watching videos. Whoa. And that's the power of the internet, and especially YouTube. I don't know if I've got the clip, but I'll try and find it. It tells you the statistics of how many YouTube videos are watched every day. It'll blow your mind when you think of it. You think, nah, it's impossible. But something like 1 billion videos, YouTube videos, across the world are watched every day. 1 billion. Like 350,000 YouTube videos are uploaded in a day, or something crazy like that. It's madness. So our children, and us as well, are just saturated with information. And pornography is no longer like it was in the old days, where you had to go to a special shop to get them. Now you can just get it on the internet. You don't even have to leave your home. So the problem comes in is when you talk to Christians, they say, nah, a person must just stop looking at pornography, or just stop taking drugs, or stop drinking alcohol. They must just stop because they're Christians and Christ has set them free and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is that the brain starts to get so addicted to those chemicals or whatever it is that the person is taking. And I was reading an article where the guy said it's like, think about this, that you've starved yourself for 2 days. You've chosen not to eat anything. You're not fasting, so it's not a spiritual activity. You've just been unable to access food for 2 whole days. So you're completely hungry. And you walk into the shop and they're making the most beautiful smelling bread. Have you ever walked into a bakery and fresh bread? And someone says, yeah, butter melting, yeah, would you be able to resist that with your hunger? No. You'd say, yeah, thank you very much. And that's what happens with addictive behavior. It's like that same thing, that your body craves it so much that it becomes something outside of yourself. And not to say that you're not accountable for your behavior, but it becomes, if you talk to addicts, they'll tell you that it becomes, it's like someone else is in control of my decisions. And the process to help the person get out of that is a long process of dealing with a whole lot of issues, because the person's addictive behavior is actually just a manifestation of something much deeper. And often, especially pornography, because it's a desire for intimacy and closeness, is a lack of intimacy and closeness towards God. And it's a desire to be close to God. So in helping the person get out of that is to teach them how to use those desires and needs to actually start to focus that energy on the intimacy and closeness with the Lord. But it's a long process, because those images stay in your mind for years. And that's the problem with that. And so this is another thing that happens with your brain. You've got the unifocus brain, which that person there has never been exposed to pornography or never been exposed to any kind of sexual pictures or images at all. The first sexual activity that he has or sees is his wife or their spouse. That's the first time. So therefore, that person's only image will be the excitement of their spouse. So they very, very, very rarely will ever end up having an affair or leaving their wife, because they are focused on that, and that's the only connection that they have to sexual gratification and desire, is that person. Okay. And then you've got the dual focus brain. So sorry, just to say that then the person, the object of their desire is real. Okay? They've only experienced the fulfillment of their desire with a real person. Okay. So the dual focus brain is when the person has been exposed to pornography and maybe a few sexual experiences and stuff. So therefore, the brain, the neurological pathways in your brain split up into two, as opposed to just one, where it's connected to one person like that. It starts to split up into two, and then the confusion comes in between the real, the fantasy, and then the person becomes an object. It doesn't become the real person of my desire. They just become the object of my desire. So they become objects, not real people. And then they start using fantasy about other people as opposed to their spouse. And that's when addiction starts. And these people will often have a problem with pornography. And the difficulty is to reverse that cycle and to change that neurological pathway so it starts to become one again, and it starts to be worn in a totally different direction. Now, the multi-focus brain is when your brain splits up into four or more, and then the real and fantasy and objects all become one. And so that person cannot distinguish between a person as a person. So anytime they have contact with females, it'll be a sexualized thing. They will see it as a sexual thing. Even just talking to a girl will be something that they will find sexually. They'll try and use sexual innuendo, sexual talk or whatever, because they objectify them and they see them as an object of their desire. So if I feel attracted to a woman, it'll become a sexual thing. It won't become just that she's a pretty girl. And then they objectify the woman, and it's all about how they look. That's why pornography is so addictive, because you go from one, that one doesn't satisfy, next one, that one doesn't, and so it goes and goes. And eventually you've got multiple images at the person then, and then their brain becomes, and that person has been exposed to pornography, affairs, strip shows, all that kind of stuff. And this person here, they say, through research and statistics and counseling, all that, it's almost impossible for them to change if they've exposed themselves to that level of sexual activity. And often you'll find that they'll end up in rehabs, and they'll have to go through onto heavy medication, and it's a long process. But there's very, very little success rate with people like that. And they get so bound and in such bondage that they cannot function as a proper human being. Even because it starts to affect. The problem with addictive behavior, it starts in one area, but the more you allow it to, it starts to pervade into every area. It affects your relationships with your family, relationship with other people, work. You start to miss work, and so on, and it starts to then take over your whole life. Internet's from 2013. Websites, 4.2 million, 12% of all total websites. 372 million pages. Daily pornographic searches engines, 68 million. Daily pornographic emails, 2.5 billion. Average daily pornography emails. A total of 90% of children aged 8 to 16 have viewed pornography online. Pornographers use many characters' names that appeal to children, such as Pokemon or whatever. So what they do is this, that the pornographers were the first ones to develop the pop-ups. You know, when you're typing and you searching stuff on the internet and an advert pops up. Buy this car now and you'll win R1 million or so. Some silly little pop-up. The pornographers were the first ones to start that because they found that if you are looking at pornography and they pop up another site, you'll go there. And they'll pop up another one. And so that's how they get addicted, you see. And so what they'll do is the person will be working on the computer and a pornography site will pop up. And sometimes the person will, click it off. But sometimes they might, okay, let me just see what this is all about. And even on Facebook, if you look at those ads on the side, now you can click those off. So what I did was every time those ads came, I just click, I said, inappropriate. Even if it was a car ad, buy this lacquer Mercedes-Benz, inappropriate, I don't want to see that. And eventually I don't get any of those ads anymore, That's what happens. But they do that, you see, because there's a lot of people, single girls from Russia. Ooh, okay. Do you? Click it off, bud. Go for the Mercedes. And so that's what they do, you see. They put those things up, and most of the time people just say, no, I'm not interested in that. But why do you think those statistics are so high? Something in the billions. People are looking at that stuff all the time. So what happens is that your child now will be playing PlayStation. Okay, they get to a level on their game, and they can't go any further. So what they've done is they've developed what they call cheat sites. So you go to a cheat site where they can get a little link, and they can then download that and put it onto their PlayStation, and they can proceed. It helps them to get over that level. Now the pornographers have tapped into those little cheat sites, and they put a little picture on the bottom there, Ben 10 or Pokemon or Donald Duck or whichever is the popular figure for kids nowadays, and your little child who's innocently going onto a cheat site to look for a cheat for his game, Ben 10, click on Ben 10 pornography site. So your child will go, oh no, ugly, click it off, or he might go, ooh. And that's how they get them at that age. Some of the kids have done it by accident. So you're searching, so you type in whitehouse.com, porn site. Racehorse.com, porn site. So next time you go into the site to gamble, no, I'm joking. But you type in racehorse, boom. Because you see what they've done is because the computer companies have developed software to block those things. So they look for words, so sex, pornography, or whatever. And so if you type in those words, an alert will come up and say, no, site blocked, site blocked, site blocked. So what they do is they take those words out of their addresses. And so you're looking for, I want to read up on Barack Obama at the White House, type in whitehouse.com, porn site. Huh? What? So they've done that. They've bought domain names that have got nothing to do with pornography, which we are so used to thinking. And you think, oh, no, it's so innocent. And you just go into that. And in the old days, you would have to go to the adult bookshops before it was ever on the street. Prior to 1994, there was no pornography in South Africa available in a shop. You always had to go to an adult shop. That's what Gary told me. Yeah, no, I'm joking. Now I know because I was addicted to pornography, but I knew that. Okay, so you had to go to an adult shop. I went to Zimbabwe for 2.5 years, but the first year my dad passed away in 1994, so I came down from Zimbabwe. In that year, so by the time I left in January, there's still no pornography, but I came down and there was pornography on every bookshelf. I was horrified. I couldn't believe it, that it was so easily accessible. But it was still a problem, you see, because you're scared to go into the CNA and take a magazine down, because just as you're paying for it, oh, hello, Pastor, nice to see you. Oh. Not my magazine, don't know whose it is. I'm just buying it for my dad. Yeah? Do you know that the statistic tells you that the majority, the first exposure to pornography is at the age of 11? And most fathers will tell you, this research says, that they hide their pornography away so that their children can't look at it. Okay, they're talking about magazines at that stage. Okay, but guess where the majority of those 11-year-olds' first exposure to pornography was? Their dad's stash. Because Dad thinks he hides it. That's where I saw pornography. My dad used to hide the Scope magazine. You older guys remember the Scope magazine? I'm not saying that any of you looked at them, but they were there. And my dad used to hide them in his cupboard. And I went looking for something. I can't even remember what it was. I think I was going to steal some of his money. He used to keep some of his money. That was a long time ago. I don't steal anymore. I went to get some of his coins, and I saw something that I put, Scope magazine, okay. And he thinks he's hiding it away. And that's what's happened. And now, but you see, now you don't even have to go to a shop. I don't even know why they got magazines anymore. Do you know that the statistics and the sales of magazines has dropped down, and videos and DVDs, dropped down completely? Because you can access it at the click of a button. You don't even have to leave your house. You got it on your phone, your iPad, any electronic media that can access the internet, you can get pornography at a click of a button. And that's the scary part of it. So there, I took those images out because last time I was here and I had those images, I got shouted at. So that whole section there, pornography magazine, pornography. And guess where that shop is? CNA, in East London. I was standing there on the aisle like this, taking a photograph. I thought I better do it quickly because they'll think I'm a pervert, you know. Taking photographs of pornography magazines. That whole section up there, pornography magazines. Where's that shop? Exclusive Books in East London. Now, can you see that? Can you see the level of that? The level's up here. So it's exactly at your eye level. I was in the CNA the one day, and I decided, well, I know where the magazines are, so I avoid that aisle. So at one stage, when I walked into the CNA in East London, the magazines were straight down there, so I'd never go down this aisle. I would always go down this aisle, make sure I didn't get exposed to that stuff. So the one day I walked in, and I didn't go down that aisle. I went my normal route, and they changed it. And the pornography magazines were right here. So I walk in, and I see this, no. And I look down, and here's this lighty, 10-year-old little boy standing looking. And I hear his mom, "Boetie, kom hier so. Boetie." He's just standing there looking like this. Boetie was, and that's it, eh? And you think that it's so innocent because, no, the adults that's up there, the little boy. But that little boy could see it. And guess what? There's a high chance that that little boy could start becoming addicted to that kind of stuff. Just from that little bit of exposure. Yes. Yes. That's right. Yes. Yeah. And you see, what do they do with it? They objectify women. Women become objects to men and to youngsters. And they don't know how to treat women with respect because they just become an object.
Sounds like this East London place is quite a dinner.
We're bringing it here. It's quite scary, eh? Do you know? That, yes, it was, yeah. And you know, when I lived up in Joburg. When I came down to East London, there was very little pornography. Very little pornography. No. Don't say that. And you see, just in a couple of years, how easy it just becomes in. And you see what they do is they've got to sell those magazines. So you look at a lot of the magazines, Sportsman's Illustrated. They've got a swimsuit edition. FHM magazine. You look at GQ magazine. Sometimes even on the ladies' magazines like Fair Lady or something, there's scantily clad women. Sometimes on the PC Format magazine, there's this woman in a bikini holding a computer part. Now, I ask you with tears in my eyes, what has a scantily clad woman in a bikini got to do with a hard drive? You know what? Yeah. Okay, computer component. But you know what it's got to do with it? I'll tell you what it's got to do with it. Because all of the advertisers know that men are visually orientated. And when a guy walks past a magazine like that and he just glances and he sees a scantily clad woman, he'll stop and he'll go, okay, let me just have a check. maybe there's something in here, let me just buy it. And he'll buy the PC format magazine. He doesn't know anything about computers, not even interested in them, but there may be a chance that there might be something, and who's going to ask him, because no one's going to ask him about a PC format magazine, but there just might be some flesh in there that I can look at. And that's why they sell it. Why do you look at these adverts with cars selling tires and they've got women there? Because they know that men are drawn to that, and that's what they're going to, and that's how they're going to hook them. That's how deceitful and evil they are. Sorry? That pretty women have brains too. Okay, just harmless fun. Favorite tactic of pornography advocates that it's harmless fun, mere adult entertainment. They like to challenge the public to prove that pornography causes no harm. All sin is a breakdown of relationship. No sin affects only the person sinning. It always has a spin-off effect on our relationships. All addictive behavior numbs our feelings. And that's what addictive behavior does. Any kind of addictive behavior. Alcohol, drugs, sexual addiction, pornography, whatever, it numbs your feelings. And that's what people why they get addicted to, because there's pain there. And they're using that coping mechanism to help them cope with that pain. And so it numbs those feelings out for a while, but because you're not dealing with the feelings, eventually those feelings will rise again, and you get into the addictive cycle. So you feel bad, you get into something to help you feel good. You feel good for a short while and feel bad because you've looked at pornography or done whatever, or used drugs, and so you feel bad, and then you use it to help you feel good, and you just get into that cycle all the time. Sin or sexual addiction breaks our relationship with God. It causes us to hide. It causes shame. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the hardness of their heart, who being past feeling, losing sensitivity, have given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with continual lust for more. Now, that right there is a perfect explanation of what pornography does. You continually lust for more. It creates impurity. It causes you to indulge in sensuality. You start to lose sensitivity, and it hardens your heart. Because all men that look at pornography start to abuse women in some way. And I'm not talking about sexual abuse, but you'll abuse a woman verbally, you'll abuse a woman emotionally, and you'll abuse a woman physically or sexually. Because that's what pornography does. It starts to close you down and inhibits your ability to connect on a deep emotional level with your spouse. It's designed to do that. It's not the pornographers that did that, it's the devil. Because the devil wants to kill you, and he'll use that to destroy you. To steal, kill, and to destroy. That's what he wants to do. And he uses pornography. It's one of the easiest ways to do that, because one of the hardest things to get over, 2 areas, food addictions and sexual addictions. Why? Because they tapped into the very fiber of our being. You need food to eat. Now, how do you balance a healthy body image with a healthy sense of food? It's very difficult for women to get out of a food addiction, because we need to have food and sustenance. Same with sex. Because men are so hardwired to be sexual beings, we are created to have that and desire that, and it's a part of our DNA, it's part of who we are. And so the devil has tapped into that and caused something that is supposed to be such a beautiful thing and such an example of the closeness and intimacy that comes from the Godhead themselves, because he talks about marriage in the light of, I'm talking about a mystery, I'm talking about the Christ and his bride, he says, in relation to marriage and sexual. And you read the Song of Solomon, and it talks about the sexual relationship that they have together. And it's such a pure, beautiful experience. And Satan has taken it and destroyed it and made it as if it's nothing. Pornography will hinder your marriage and home life. Devaluation of the mate. Love turns to lust for the ideal woman portrayed. forced perversion onto the mate. Men often try to get wives to participate in perverted acts they've seen. Adultery, pornography encourages indiscriminate sex. Now, often the pornographers will say to you, no, this it doesn't do that, and it enhances marriage and stuff like that. But what troubles me with that is that often people will go and say, oh, no, but I spoke to this pornographer and he said that pornography is not that bad. Why are you talking to a pornographer? You think a pornographer is going to say to you, no, it actually is very bad for you. Don't buy it. Obviously he's going to say it does nothing wrong, it enhances your sex life. But I can guarantee you now, every statistic that you read and research will tell you that every marriage that has used pornography will either break up or will struggle somewhere along the line, simply because pornography and that kind of stuff is against God's principles. Not because it's bad. It's because it's against God's principles. And anytime we engage in any behavior that is against God's principles, whether it's good for us or bad for us, it's going to destroy us. So you take exercise. Nothing wrong with exercise. But when you are using exercise to make yourself feel good and you get your affirmation and your sense of who you are from exercise or looking good or from shopping or eating or watching TV and soapies, and you get your identity and you're so wrapped up in that nothing else matters, it's a problem. Now, if you look at, there's nothing wrong with looking good or going to gym or watching TV, but when that thing starts to become the thing in your life and you cannot live without that, you're as addicted to that thing as much as a person is addicted to pornography. Many years ago, pornography has been a male-dominated addictive thing, okay? And women haven't been addicted to viewing pornography. So it's been a male-dominated thing. But over the years, the statistics have started to rise, that more and more women have started to become addicted to pornography as well. And it's a scary thing. And you know what the scariest thing is of all? Is that when they've done studies of men that have been addicted to pornography, and they viewed pornography on a regular basis, they start to, over time, to believe that rape is not bad. And you should give the least amount of punishment to a rapist. Okay, that's what pornography does. The even more scariest thing about that is that when they've done that with women who've watched pornography on a regular basis, they start to say the same thing. That rape isn't that bad, and you mustn't punish rapists that bad because it's okay. And that's what pornography does. It starts to take away and devalue human life, humans' feelings and emotions. So I can do with you what I want. Because in pornography, if you look at what they do there, is anytime a man approaches a woman and the woman says no, it's just a cursory no, because it eventually happens anyway. So a woman's no becomes, it's just pretend, it's not real. So what happens, over time, if you watch that a lot, eventually majority of people who watch pornography on a regular basis will want to act that out with real human beings. So what's going to happen is that when he wants to do that to a girl, or she wants to do that with a guy, and the guy says no, he's going to keep on going because pornography says no, the no is not really real. Just persevere and push and think. And if she resists, then just rape her, because it's not that bad. Can you see how it just brings you down to the level of an animal? Because you see, if you look at it, the main reason the devil wants to destroy marriage, prime way to do it. Thanks for that, but that's true. It's so true. It actually gets younger and younger. I mean, I was at one of the schools the other day. The kid's 8 years old, brought pornography to school. He had a magazine. I don't think he knew what it was, but he found the magazine somewhere, and now he's showing all his mates. He's 8 years old. The Bible says that you must not awaken desire before it's time. Now listen to this. Someone comes to me and says, no, I want you to talk to my son about pornography and stuff. I said, has the guy looked? No, he hasn't. He's just like, his friends have shown him some explicit pictures, but not really pornography, just like a FHM magazine or whatever. So it's like what I call softcore pornography. So he hasn't really seen any of that. And I said, are you sure you want me? No, I want you to tell him, and don't hold anything back. Just tell him the real deal and how bad it is. So I said, okay, well, but I'm still very conservative in how when I talk to younger kids about it, so I don't go into too much. But their parents were there and everything. But they kept on asking me questions, so I answered. I was a bit uncomfortable because I didn't think that the kid at that age needs to know that. I told him that, but they were adamant that they wanted me to do it. So I did it. Within 2 months, that kid had started to lie and deceive his parents in trying to look for pornography, which he had never done before. 11 years old. Hiding it away, accessing the iPad when he's not supposed to. Now, I'm not saying that he wouldn't have done that, but I've got a sneaky suspicion that because of what I spoke about and what his parents allowed him to be exposed to there, it awakened that desire too soon. You see, we think that if we don't talk to our kids about it, it's better. Because we're too afraid that if we do talk to them about it, it's going to start that kind of stuff. But they are exposed to it already. So the best way to deal with that is to what my wife always says. She says, if a child comes to you and asks you a question, you answer the question. You don't go into any detail. Say, Dad, where did we come from? So Dad says, many years ago, the world evolved, and slowly but surely we became monkeys, and then we evolved into human beings. So the boy goes back to the mom and says, Mom, where did we come from? He said, many years ago, God created the universe, and he eventually created man and woman. So the son says, but Dad says we came from monkeys. So she says, well, Dad told you about his family, I'm telling you about mine. So when the child comes to you and asks you about something that's like you're riding in the car and, Dad, do parents have sex? What is sex? And you're driving in your car and you're like, okay, ask your mom. So you think, okay, well, what am I going to say now? How old is my child? What do I need to know? So instead of going into this whole tirade of like, okay, sex is this, and stop the car and sit him down and tell him the whole thing, you can ask him a couple of questions. That's interesting. Why do you ask that? Why do you want to know? What do you know? Because he might surprise you. You might say, gee, I didn't know that. So often what parents do is they think that when their child asks them, I better tell them. Now, I think that there is a right time to start to talk to your child. When that time is, you need to decide as a parent. Because society says to us, now it should be here. If you look at the educational system, it tells you at 9 years old, my kid's learning about stuff. Now, my daughters are completely oblivious to this stuff. My oldest daughter, who's 14, knows a little bit about pornography because she knows what I do. And she's heard me talk to Mandy, my wife, about some stuff. But I don't talk explicitly about stuff. When I talk about things, I try and keep it out of that because they don't need to know that. If they ask me, I will say to them, ask your mom, because they're girls, and I don't want to talk to them about that stuff unless we do it together. Because I want to give them a healthy sense of maleness and sexuality that respects their privacy. And when it comes to sexuality and nakedness and nudeness, it becomes an area outside of what I do with my daughter. That becomes the woman's role. If she wants to talk to me with mom there, which she won't because she's quite a shy, embarrassed little girl when it comes to that kind of stuff, very like her mother, conservative and pure. So I will respect that. So when they're small, we would I'd walk into their room while she's dressing and stuff like that. But there came a time where her door was partly closed. And I knew that it was time to knock and ask, can I come in? Now, my younger daughter is starting to get to that stage now. So, whereas in the past, I'll just walk in and say, okay, let's go. But now I don't do that. Because you respect that. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but
No problem.
we're due for load shedding at 11. And
Okay.
might be good. I don't know how much more you've got of this, because we need to shut down the system.
Okay. Pornography essentially trains men. I'll get your questions. I got your question. Okay. Don't forget them. Essentially trains men and women to be consumers, not lovers, to treat sex as commodities, to think about sex as something on tap and made to order. Cultural influences that undermine success, TV, focus on materialism, the busyness of lifestyle, excessive divorce rates, the proliferation of electronic entertainment. It's a beautiful day outside. I really want you to go and play outside. What can his mom say? His mom can't say anything. Our educational system is breakdown, the culture of comfort, the overall selfishness of individuals, Christian persecution. Look at this. I thought this was interesting. We should forgive our enemies. Oh, that's beautiful. We should forgive our enemies. Buddha. Oh, that's beautiful. We should forgive our enemies. Jesus. Oh, not religion. Isn't that true? How you found that? The Dead Society, the context of the last days. There you go. In a given day, 2 billion videos are being watched on YouTube around the globe. YouTube has become an enormous impact on internet culture. Guess where your children are getting their stuff from? From YouTube. That's where they're getting that everything's okay, the sexualized videos that they watch on music and things like that. So be careful when you give your child a smartphone. They can access that stuff.